Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here at Forging the Sword. I'm Command Sergeant Major Trenton Zaragoza. I'm the Senior Aviation Enlisted Trainer for here at JMRC for the Falcon team. And I'm joined here with Master Sergeant Chaney and Master Sergeant Quitugua.
Yeah, hi. Master Sergeant Evan Chaney. I am the Senior Arial Medevac Trainer here at JMRC, and I have a background in both aviation and medicine.
Master Sergeant Anthony Quitugua. I am the Brigade Medical OC and the Senior Medic for JMRC. Background is ground evacuation, being a ground medic 16 years now.
So what we're going to discuss here today is prolonged casualty care and some of the scenarios and training gaps and things that we've identified here at JMRC. And so let's go ahead and dig right into it. So one of the things that we identified here at JMRC was a training gap in CTCs that allow for prolonged casualty care to actually be tested and evaluated on units. And so I'll let Master Sergeant Chaney kind of talk about where that kind of where that was driven from, because it was kind of his brainchild to get to happen.
Yeah, thank you. Good idea, Ferry here. So with the prolonged casualty care in doctrine, we see it time and time again in different references. So with prolonged field care, prolonged casualty care, prolonged care, and everybody's looking for a definition, right? We like to know what should that look like. Well, when it comes to patient care, there's not ever going to be a singular one-size-fits-all. So in order for us to evaluate whether a unit is trained, proficient, and ready to perform the task of prolonged casualty care, we have to somehow come up with a metric or a way of grading them. And so through our collaborative efforts, we've been able to put together a scenario. The current scenario we've run twice now is the prolonged casualty care that focuses on a neurogenic shock patient. And so that gives us a way to evaluate and kind of help the unit codify where their deficiencies are when it comes to the prolonged casualty care. So,
from your guys' experience in field medicine, what were the scenarios typically like that tried to get after prolonged casualty care?
A lot of it was very cerebral. A lot of it was cognitively challenging. So, but in essence, it was just overwhelming. As we discussed a lot, it's a prolonged mass cal scenario. And so how do we address that? So as Master Sergeant Chaney was alluding to, there's really no definition of PCC doctrinally for the Army. In summary, it's prolonged mass cal. So how do we replicate that? And right now all we're seeing is the lack of evacuation and sitting on a patient. But what does that mean and how do we measure that is what we're trying to identify. So far we did the blood transfusions.
Yep.
We did blood transfusions. We've done point of injury care, reacting to contact, pretty much the typical tasks. There's just a lot of gaps that we've identified. I don't want to jump the gun and.
Yeah. No, and I guess would you guys agree that most medical scenarios at CTCs and also within your guys' training, typically when we say we're doing prolonged casualty care, is it meeting a standard that what we think in large-scale combat will result in long-term or prolonged casualty care, or is it just 3 to 4 hours? What do those training scenarios generally look like?
yeah, so I think 3 to 4 hours typically is kind of the long-term care that we're seeing. And with that, it's generally, we as 68 Whiskeys, we do a really good job of hitting the March algorithm, but then once you've exhausted the March algorithm, it's like, what do you do to meet that next 3 to 4 hours of care right after that initial 15 minutes maybe? So typically what we've seen is providers and medics will do repeat vitals, maybe do an extra intervention, or maybe start an IV if they haven't gotten 2 lines established, but they're not really getting after what it means for what does a prolonged care look like? And a lot of that historically has been what people call nursing care. And so it's things that are as nuanced or seemingly obvious, right? Is if your patient's not restricted from eating, they got to eat 3 times a day, right? If they're going to lay in the same cot for 21 hours, you got to move them or they're going to get pressure ulcers, right? So these are the things that we need to start thinking about. And then when you start getting into more in-depth physiology, when we start looking at acidosis, when we start looking at coagulopathies, and things that are going to affect the patient's ability to survive that traumatic injury that they had, we just haven't had that level of training. And kind of where this is coming from is from lessons learned that we've gotten out of Ukraine, right? So we're seeing point of injury, they get the care, they may not be able to move that patient for another 6, 8, 10, 24 hours, depending on what that threat environment looks like. So if there's drones operating overhead, or now we got to wait till period of dark, but even now with period of dark, it's so inundated with drones that they're really having to sit on that patient at the point of injury and not getting a chance to move them through what we would, our normal casualty flow, which, hit the easy button, here comes a helicopter to evacuate you, or, here comes your ground ambulance to move you to that roll 1, the roll 2, the roll 3, and we start working through our patient care and evacuation. That's not happening in the same timeline that we're used to. And so I think for that's kind of where that PCC scenario has got to catch up, right? We got to hit that metric before we're on our back foot because, we haven't trained it yet sufficiently. That's my experience. That's a long-winded answer. But.
I think you did a good job in explaining why we're at the point of increasing the scenarios, why we're trying to improve how us as a CTC are evaluating a Role 1 or our line medics out in the field as they treat casualties at the POI or point of impact. Where in doctrine is it actually defined? For what is a definition for PCC?
So actually doctrine is at the joint level of where it's actually defined. So it's actually defined under prolonged field care, and it's the continued delivery of medical care prior to patient movement beyond the holding capability of that role of care. So in summary, it's a prolonged MASCAL. But MASCAL, it comes down to its own definition, which is just exacerbating whatever echelon of care you have or resources available. So how do we prolong those resources? How do we make 2 is 1, 1 is none? All right, and I think that goes back down to the CC3 CLS, CC3 all service member, field sanitation teams, NRP potentially, the advanced EMT, and delayed evacuation casualty management. There's a lot of troop schools that we can look at, and that goes back into our analysis during our planning conferences for organizations that are coming out to the CTC. Is do we have a good pulse check on organizations that are coming out here to exercise prolonged casualty care? A lot of times, as we know here, it's no, or they could do better. But I think the best way, and it's a way to assess that, is what are their CLS numbers, or 100% all service members trained, field sanitation teams, is everybody up to date in EMTB, field craft, so on and so forth. But that's the definition, all right, and part of the analysis of it.
Right. So we've discussed the training gap. We've discussed the doctrine definition. We've discussed kind of the importance and why we see the need for this for a better scenario or better training and evaluation of prolonged casualty care. Because as we continue to look at large-scale combat, we recognize that prolonged casualty care is going to be a really probably the norm over what we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we're evacuating casualties within the first 1 to 2 hours. So a little bit of background on developing. Master Sergeant Chaney alluded, we've tested a scenario twice now. We went through the process of trying to get our hands on some scenarios that would really get after prolonged casualty care for the aviation team here at JMRC. and we really kept hitting a lot of dead ends, and so we determined that we needed to create our own scenario to really get after prolonged casualty care in the way that we feel is going to be realistic for large-scale combat. And so our goal was a 20-hour scenario. And so as we started going after that, we ran into our own roadblocks in that it's very time consuming and we have our own day jobs. And then it's also very difficult to create a scenario that's going to actually challenge a doctor, role one, senior medics, or a PAs in the role one. And so we felt the need that we needed some additional medical assistance. So we reached out to a major cheminy in the 4AAC from the UK, and she volunteered to work with us on the scenario. And so a lot of the work that went into what we did came from her, and so we tested it. What was that? Allied Spirit 25 was the first time that we ran it, and it was just the two of us.
Right.
You want to talk us through that?
Yeah, so that was interesting. So the roll one that came was an aviation roll one, and just for context, aviation roll ones typically have no more than 5, maybe 6 on a heavy day. That includes a doctor, a flight surgeon, flight PA, senior NCO, so typically an E5, and then 2 to 3 10-level whiskeys. This particular group that came had a brand new out-of-the-box doc, and then a fairly seasoned medic, and then 2 medics that were actually borrowed from a different unit. They weren't even part of the organization. So very, very much put together, and very limited resources. They were able to run our scenario and hold that patient for just over 9 hours, I think it was. So that was, honestly, for us, that was pretty encouraging. And a bit, we were taken back a little bit. I think we hedged our bets maybe 3-4 hours is kind of what we thought it might be. But yeah, so they definitely hit that 9-ish hour mark. But then for us, we were able to take that information, debrief them, but then also come back for an introspective look. Okay, how do we make this better? As Sergeant Major said, we're building this scenario, so now that was our chance to kind of embellish or build upon what we had grounded ourselves in, to really kind of make the higher brains, right, the deeper thinking on physiology, to really bring that along. And so with that initial scenario, it was challenging to get it to stretch beyond that point. So we went back. Doc Kimony, again, has been a great resource. She helped us out. Went back in, continued to build on that scenario she had started, to where for combined resolve 2502, we were able to send a second time for a new unit. And they had a flight surgeon, that was an internal medicine doc. They had a PA that had been through the flight surgeon course. They had a senior NCO, hard charging, and then they had 2 really squared away 10 levels. And those guys, I mean, they knocked it out of the park. They like Sergeant Major said, they held them for I think it was just over 21 hours.
Yep.
And then during that time, to Master Rank Q's point, it doesn't happen in a vacuum, right? So we couldn't flex multiple patients that were the prolonged care patients, but we also didn't stop any of the other injects that were happening. So we had other patients that came in based off of complex attacks and things that were happening within the footprint. And so in addition to their essentially intensive care level patient that they had for 21 plus hours, they ran 5 or 6 more patients through during a smaller MASCAL. They were able to treat, evaluate, and RTD those patients. They ended up holding one of those patients. It was, I believe, a
Below the
knee amputation. Yeah, thank you. So they held that patient for just over 13 hours before both the amputation patient and the neurogenic shock patient were able to be evacuated. And the level of intensity and care that they provided for the very robust scenario that we had for the neurogenic shock, they did equally as well with that traumatic amputation patient. So again, kudos to that team, but it was, again, I think we learned as many lessons from that one as we did the initial repetition that we've conducted. So
We did, and I'm back up just a little bit. So the way we initiated this scenario, because we are the aviation team, is we initiated off of a DART mission, or a downed aircraft, and so that is what caused the injuries on the casualty, and the one of the very junior medics, the 10 levels were part of the DART team, and they were the first responder really for that casualty. And so that medic was responsible for caring for the casualty for roughly 2 to 3 hours at the site of injury. So what he brought with him is what he had to treat that soldier, or that casualty. And so that point of impact to getting to the Roll 1 timeline, we're trying to replicate in response to what we're learning from a near-peer fight that we're seeing to our east. And so that's what we replicated in that aspect. That medic, I think, was challenged. Would you agree in what he saw at the POI?
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. So that was good. So we Sergeant Major took it upon himself, but we got some dog bones, cut them up, hacked them up, broke them, make them look like a fracture, and did moulage that way. And so when he was able to actually cut the clothes off and see that open comminuted fracture, his eyes got big like saucer plates, and he rose to the occasion, responded, fell back to his training, which was good to see, and did really well. But I think he, as that first responder, he definitely got a lot of lessons out of that. So, within the scenario, there was an additional kind of value added, I guess, with that point of injury, allowing him to be the one to sit on him for a while and figure out, okay, what am I doing? Again, past that March algorithm of, and again, kind of an atypical presentation, right? Going through whiskey school, we're not seeing a bunch of neurogenic shock patients. We're seeing, oh, that guy's missing an arm, that guy's missing a leg,
Very obvious.
Right. Yeah. So it definitely made him think, I think, at a higher level.
Would you guys agree that although neurogenic shock it's not an overly common injury, we used a helicopter, but from your ground experience, would you say that is a potential with a rollover and a striker or any armored vehicle as far as a rollover, or even possibly the hatches, if the hatches are coming down and they're hitting somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. What we're identifying is the thermobaric trend, if you will, Russia, Ukraine, and a lot of that is maybe the empty space in the brain, coup contra coup, the launching forward and backwards, can make it to where it's a very difficult injury to treat, let alone sustain for a prolonged period of time. So just identifying that and relating it to how we can do it in the ground aspect, right? Because as you were identifying, the personnel that are assigned to an aviation Roll 1 differs a lot from a maneuver Roll 1, right? Because the maneuver has a PA, potentially a mapped doc, and then you have a senior medic, and then a med service, and then about 40 medics assigned with about 5 FLAs. So a lot more robust. So applying that same scenario to a maneuver Roll 1 was, I guess, to be seen, to be determined how we can apply. I think it would just be a little bit bigger of an inject. And I tried to replicate that by making it to where it was a little bit more difficult to evacuate during CBR 2501, or 02, I'm sorry.
Sorry. You brought up that it would be challenging, right, because of the maneuver units, and that's so one of the things that we're doing is we're working on creating additional scenarios, and so some of those scenarios we're working with a lot of different doctors in developing those. You want to talk us through a few of those scenarios that we have working on?
Yeah, sure. So we have one that we've gotten some real-time data back on patient injuries and people being evacuated. And so one of them is going to be for a drone attack. It'll be a polytrauma patient that was struck by a drone.
And then you have, to your point, we have some thermobaric. There's a thermobaric munitions, so we'll be seeing a lot of burns, overpressure injuries. Again, things that haven't been the normal for us, but again, reflecting on these lessons that are earned in blood, we're trying to adjust our fire. And then we'll also have a CBurn scenario, right? Because we often find ourselves falling short of being able to treat or train rather to a standard for CBurn, let alone treat effectively. So that'll be an interesting one. And then the last one that we've been kind of put onto or taken a look at is going to be a diseased non-battlefield injury. And so for that is going to be really helpful because again, the Russians were defeated in Afghanistan, DMBI and stingers, but DMBI was the main thing, and we're seeing that again with the trenches, right? So in Ukraine and Russia, we're seeing large numbers of DMBI, and so their fighting ability has been degraded because of these DMBI. So we'll have 4 or 5, probably 6 of these scenarios, so that we can kind of have a Rolodex of scenarios to work through and make it applicable, right? So for the maneuver teams, we'll have drone attacks. Nobody's immune to drones or thermobaric munitions. So these things are being built in such a way that they'll be able to be worked across any formation. It doesn't have to just be specifically an aviation formation. So, but yeah, so that's kind of the way ahead. And then with that is with the polytrauma, with those thermobarics, right, is starting to get into that blood transfusion, right?
Yep.
So, do you want to talk kind of about
Sure.
how we did that last blood transfusion?
Yeah, so back it up a little bit. So just to tie it in together with the infrastructure of the medical. So with the drones, they're identifying formations based off of some type of heat signature, right? And that's where the prep med comes in, right? Because what we're seeing with the trend is that Joe just likes to go to the wood line, pee on the bush, maybe leave a landmine or two, and right, they're not digging slit trenches. There's the field craft of it is getting lost, right? So we have to get some way to fix that, but the diving into the blood is something that we wanted to exercise here in the CTC, and we decided to do with autologous blood transfusions. So we are having one patient go down, draw from one arm, give to the other arm with time gaps. What we've identified in the CPGs is 15-minute draw and then 21-minute transfuse, so a total time of 36 minutes. And actually, we were able to exercise 5 in the past rotation, and 2 were successful. And so just evaluating that and just seeing how the wins and losses and then the lessons learned. I think a huge lesson learned that we identified was a lot of medics are being bogged down by this procedure. So how do we help force multiply that, right? And that comes back when we joined the Army, CLS was doing IV sticks, right? And now CLS is no longer able to do that, right? So maybe we relook that or do some type of first responder training. But with that, the success rate for the 2 out of the 5 was simply based off of a couple things. So the medic was very good at field craft, was very good at hypothermia control. As we saw, right, the patient it wasn't a success the first time, but hypothermia control, and then they were able to control the scene. They didn't get lost behind, hey, that's a sergeant major over here. I need you to take this TC3 card. I can't be doing this. I have to do this, right? And they really focus on life-saving intervention as opposed to the distractors, if you will.
Yep.
So to help kind of tie this all together, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, but what we're trying to do here at JMRC in a medical perspective is go from 2 to 4 hour scenarios that generally have medics or healthcare providers putting, checking vitals every so often, but not overly involved with casualties for long periods of time. And then we're adapting better scenarios. We're improving our moulage capabilities. We're in our scenarios, it's not just that they're holding them for 20 hours, but roughly every 30 to 40 minutes, they're having a new inject from that casualty, whether it's hypothermia, vomiting, bleeding's not stopped, deep vein thrombosis. We're seeing all kinds of additional interactions as they're going through, and so they're keeping those medical providers much more involved for a much longer time than just the 3 to 4 hours where it was just watching them off to the side. As part of that, as we move into drone attacks and amputations and stuff like that, we're incorporating the blood transfusions, which is obviously another gap that we got to get better at, because we know that if you're looking at a near peer fight in large scale combat, they have similar munitions as us. It's just a different name. And so identifying that and the necessity to improve on that training, is that's kind of how you guys are seeing as we're changing this?
Yeah, I think so. It's, I think keeping away from building bad training habits or bad training scars, right?
Yeah.
Doing good medicine. That's what it comes back to, is good medicine. Whether you're going to do it in the hospital or you're going to do it in the field, it comes back to, am I doing the best? Is that
Right.
something I would actually do for one of these two sitting here? Or is that just something I'm finger drilling and saying, yeah, I did it? Because we're going to default back to what our training is. And if we're not doing it and not giving it its best, then we're not going to be able to rise to the occasion. And so, I think, not to get all squirrely here, but this is kind of the sexy stuff, but it's the necessary stuff. But, we fully acknowledge that March, right? The basic stuff. Basics is what's going to save lives. But once we've done those basics, once we've mastered March, once we have that physiologic insult taken care of to the best we can, now we're going to transition into the prolonged casualty care
Right.
of how do we sustain these casualties until we can get them evacuated, right? And so one of those things is walking blood banks, right? And then starting to look also at our modernization of sets, kits, and outfits. If we're asking the Roll 1 or Roll 1 forward to be able to provide this care or this level of intensive care, there's definitely a material shortage. There's things that they don't have. And so it goes back to your point of field craft, right? We have to get better at field craft if we're not going to be given the resources that we need.
Right.
So I
And
think
that-
it's a multifaceted piece that we have to kind of work
And just to
towards.
build off of that, like as we all know here, the blood kits are not M-toed items, right? Those are commercial off the shelf, and just figuring out the best blood kit, I guess, for this type of transfusion is a win also. Right. So
What would you say are some additional things that we, or what's the way forward that you see us moving internally to JMRC, but also recommendations larger scale just across the medical field and to help influence the brigades?
right. So what I would say is we got to make sure the infrastructure is there, but we also have to have the leader involvement, right? So as we were discussing, there's only been a handful of brigades that have come through JMRC that to exercise some type of prolonged casualty care because they were prepped for it, right? And the sustainment portion of it was a heavy lift for the NCO Corps, and they owned it, right? And that's outside of the medical field too, but they were really honed in sustainment rehearsals as far as where are they putting CCPs, where are they doing AXPs, where are the Roll 1 staged, and just the involvement from the brigade CSM down was very eye-opening, and I think a huge sustain. What we're trying to exercise in forward rotations is telemedicine, dialing back both internal and external, whether it's getting back to the Roll 1 and dialing into that PA, or dialing back to the advisor line back in Fort Sam or the burn unit or our regional medical center. Exercising that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Preventative medicine, and then expanding and improving our combat lifesavers. I understand all of us have gone through some type of CLS going up through our career, but we have to, it expires, all right, and we have to make sure we double tap that.
All right. So I think this has been a great discussion on what we're doing here at JMRC in moving prolonged casualty care forward, and we're hoping that this is challenging and it's beneficial for not just the Roll 1s but the line medics, and eventually I think we push it to the Roll 2. That's my personal feeling. because I think they need to be looking at that capability as well as they're farther forward, more near the flot than, because that flot's going to continue to grow as we look at near peer fighting.
Yes.
So I think that, you know, we have a good way forward. I think that we're taking prolonged casualty care in the direction that it needs to be going, and being able to challenge and test at a CTC, which, as we've seen, is extremely difficult, and it's very time consuming.
That is.
It's time consuming in creating, it's time consuming in executing, but when you look at a near peer fight, that is going to be one of our biggest aspects when we just look at the sheer number of casualties that we should be expecting.
30% attrition.
And so I think that if we can get after this at the battalion and brigade level, that we will help save numerous lives. And I think that's ultimately our goal. It's not just about training in itself, but it's about helping win wars and save lives. And that's what we're after.
Bringing people home.
So I appreciate you guys joining us today for this episode of Forging the Sword, and we'll see you next time.
Trying to win.